the Firearms Prohibition Orders Amendment legislation bill. For too long, gangs have been an intimidating and an unwelcome presence in our communities. They were able to increase in size by over 51% under a previous soft-on-crime Labour government. This government is absolutely committed to restoring law and order for our communities, and we will do this by ensuring that police have the additional tools that they need to take firearms out of the hands of gangs and criminals. The Firearms Prohibition Orders Legislation Amendment Bill is an important part of the government's response to this. Our communities have experienced a frightful increase in gang-related violence, public intimidation, and crimes involving illegally held firearms. It is time that we take back control. Firearm prohibition orders are made by the court upon application by police when offenders have committed serious violent offences. They prohibit offenders from holding a firearms licence and from accessing firearms. Once enacted, this amendment legislation will help police to make our communities safer by improving the current Firearms Prohibition Orders regime. The bill we introduced today will expand the Firearms Prohibition Orders eligibility to more people who are in gangs, those who associate with gangs, and those who commit serious offences. It also gives police greater search powers. These orders are an important tool for police to keep firearms out of the hands of those who pose a risk to public safety. The bill makes 3 key changes to the Firearms Prohibition Orders regime, which I'll now refer to as FPOs. The first change is to expand the qualifying criteria. Until now, FPOs could only be issued to people convicted of certain specific violent offences like murder, serious assault, sexual violence, and aggravated robbery. The reality is that many senior gang members have others doing their dirty work, and this means they often end up with only low-level convictions rather than convictions for serious offending. This bill will rectify that, so that FPOs can be issued to any member or associate of a gang or organised criminal group that commits any drug, firearms or violent offence. The bill's second change is to give police new specialist search powers so that anyone subject to an FPO can be searched at any time. People with FPOs are deemed to be the highest risk to public safety and should be subject to the highest level of monitoring. Police need to be able to search offenders with an FPO, their vehicles and their premises for firearms at any time to ensure that they are complying with the court-ordered FPO. This change supports our police to keep our communities safe from gun crime. We are giving police the tools that they need to ensure that these criminals are not accessing firearms. This government deems it critical to ensuring the success of the FPO regime. Finally, the third change made by this bill is to establish a process for people who no longer pose a risk to apply to have their FPO modified or even removed. A recipient will be able to apply to the court for determination as to whether the FPO should be changed or indeed lifted. This will ensure FPOs remain targeted only to those high-risk offenders. The review mechanism provides an incentive for people with FPOs to engage in rehabilitation and pursue law-abiding lives. Keeping firearms out of the hands of gang members and high-risk offenders is fundamental to upholding this government's commitment to public safety. The Firearms Prohibition Orders Legislation Amendment Bill provides police with the practical tools they need to enforce and monitor the regime. It sends a clear message to criminals that gun crime will not be tolerated and confirms our commitment to local communities that we take their safety seriously. Now I open up for questions.
How many people have been subject to FPOs so far, and these changes that you're making, how many more do you think will come under FPOs as a result?
At the moment, there are 31 people that have FPOs placed upon them. The original legislation came in November 2022, and we expect by the time this one goes through its full process, we could have between 80 to 100 people.
So it was pretty small numbers here.
At the moment, it's small numbers, but by extending the criteria, we expect that those that are committing harm in our communities will be captured.
And are they actually working? Are people complying with the FPOs, or are they still continuing to, possess firearms and getting caught for it?
And this is why we need to have this amendment legislation bill go through, because while we've given police the power to apply to the court to place an FPO on a person, their ability to actually check on that person is not there, and that's what this amendment bill will allow them to do.
To clarify, that 80 to 100 figure, what does that refer to?
That refers to the expected number of people to have FPOs potentially placed upon them by the time this amendment bill goes through.
Right, so the application of this amendment would lead to about 80 to 100. I mean, yet further to Benedict's point is it's very, very small numbers of people.
At the moment.
So why can we not access the that other, 60 odd people?
Indeed, and that's why, Adam, we're bringing in this piece of legislation. So under the current regime, we have 31. By the time this bill goes through, which will open the criteria, we expect to have 80 to 100. We don't know how many people are actually going to be added into the system once we open this up, but I expect it to be more. The whole idea that we give police the ability to be able to check on those that have FPOs when we know it's going to increase once the amendment bill goes through is fundamental to making sure the legislation is fit for purpose.
Do you envisage any Bill of Rights issues when it comes to that particular issue, police being able to have basically unlimited powers to stop and search people they expect to or suspect to have a weapon?
I've already sought advice from Crown Law, who have told me that what we are doing is neither a new punishment nor is it a new penalty. It's about allowing police to be able to enforce the order that's already in place. So I've been told on initial advice that there would not be a Bora issue. I expect, though, as we go through this process, the Attorney General will be looking at it and will have her view as well.
So you're confident that this is consistent with the right not to be unreasonably searched?
I do believe so, because as mentioned by Crown Law, it's neither a new penalty nor is it a new punishment. So therefore it doesn't fit within Section 21 or 26 of the Bill of Rights Act. But at the end of the day, the criminals themselves that are illegally using firearms to cause harm in our communities don't care about anyone else's Bill of Rights. So we've got to make sure we have a regime that's fit for purpose, that looks after our communities as a whole.
How would you reassure those people who see this as an overreach and are concerned about people getting caught up in it who shouldn't?
I don't see that it is an overreach. On the initial advice that we've had from the Crown Law Office, it's neither a new punishment nor is it a new penalty, and therefore does not overreach the Bill of Rights.
What's the time frame now for getting this through the legislative process?
We expect it to be finished through its entire process by the end of this year.
There's been a lot of criticism in the past about the police's gang register list and how it's not a good and accurate representation of who is actually a gangster and who's not. How are you going to reconcile that criticism with using that as a basis for this move?
We need to ensure that the current regime that we have in place, which notifies under legislation 41 known gangs, is the place that we go to when we look at who is going to be involved in this. But also, it's not just about the gang members here. It's about people who commit serious violent offences. So it's their associates. It's those that are doing money laundering, that use firearms to be able to go about their criminal business. It's about taking the illegal firearms off the street and making sure that our communities are safe.
I get that, but the criticism is with the list in itself and the data used to obtain that not being the best source of, or the best use of that data, or the best way to find that out. Is there any thoughts from your perspective about more resources into that particular area, just so you'll be able to, on one hand, beef up the legislation, but on the other hand, have a good, robust piece of data to use so you can make it as fulsome as possible?
It's about making sure that those with firearms, whether they're in a gang or not, are held accountable for the crimes that they commit, and that we give police the tools to be able to enforce the orders that are placed
So
upon
you're
them.
giving them the tools with this legislation. I'm talking specifically about this list that has been criticised in the past for not being a very good list, essentially.
And I understand what you're saying about the list, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter about the list, it's about the people who commit the crimes. Now, those are primarily gang members and gang associates, but they're not the only people committing crimes with firearms. So it doesn't matter whether they're on a list or not. They commit the crime, they're going to be held accountable.
Does that kind of prove that an aspect of this tightening is kind of pointless in a sense, because people who commit those crimes can have FPOs applied to them whether they're in a gang or not? You know, you're not actually, designating FPOs specifically for gang members by legislation.
I think the reality with all of this is that those that have FPOs on them do come from gang members or gang associations as well. And what we have as a government have told the society out there is that we will come down hard on crime. We are going to target the gangs, and we are going to target those that use firearms for harm in our community.
So the legislation as it stands doesn't stop FPOs being applied to gang members?
The legislation as it stands doesn't stop FPOs.
Being applied to gang members, so what's the difference? Is it simply that you're just expanding the range of charges by which FPOs can be applied?
We're doing a couple of things here. We're expanding the regime so that those that commit offences under the Arms Act, under the Crimes Act, under the Misuse of Drugs Act, under the Psychoactive Substances Act, are able to be brought in to this regime and held accountable if they are committing crimes with firearms. That wasn't there for police before. The other regime that we're giving is police the search powers to be able to enforce the orders. Now, that wasn't there in the regime before. We already have 31 people with these orders. There will be more people with these orders upon them. The police need to be able to enforce those orders, and under the current regime, they can't do that.
How many more charges will be within the regime now?
I hope that there will be a lot more charges that will be able to be utilised by New Zealand Police when they apply to the courts for the orders to be placed on an individual.
It's not clear exactly how many more crimes will fit within the FPO regime at this point.
When you have entire acts where, and the regime that we currently have only has a couple of acts, the Arms Act and the Crimes Act. We are adding more acts. We are also putting onto the system the fact that the maximum penalty has to be 1 year of imprisonment or more. Now that
So you're lowering the threshold?
we're lowering the threshold, and that allows police to be able to allow the application to the courts for more firearm prohibition orders to be placed on people.
It's not retrospective and it has to still occur at sentencing, correct?
Correct.
You campaigned on having a stronger regime, did you not? That wasn't quite tied to sentencing, if I remember right?
We certainly did want a stronger regime to make sure that we get firearms out of the hands of people who are not licensed and are committing harm. But the reality is, under a coalition government, you get to negotiate how it is that you are going to affect the safety of our communities.
So was it National that wanted it to still be tied to some of those existing mechanisms?
So, sorry, Thomas, I don't
Was it
understand
the
that.
National Party that wanted this renewed FPO regime still tied to existing mechanisms like occurring at sentencing?
Look, it's important that we do make sure that there is a separation between what police do in their jobs of being able to bring a criminal to account and what the justice system do to ensure that criminal is held to account. So we do have to have that separation there. It's up to New Zealand Police to make sure that they can present a case to the courts, and then it's up to the courts to make sure that they have a regime that's in place that's fit for the person which it's placed upon.
Can you explain the thinking or perhaps the evidence behind the idea of being able to revoke an FPO or to change it? Is there anything in the short time that we've had FPOs in place or be able to be applied that suggests that it's been too heavy-handed, or is it more just you guys wanting to put an incentive in there?
I think it's important to have an incentive. When you look at a 10-year regime that's been placed on a person, if they over 5 years show that they actually have changed their behaviour, they have rehabilitated, they are law-abiding people, then they should be given the chance to apply again to the courts who place the order on them to have it lifted again.
So what would they have to do to satisfy that within 5 years?
Behave, be law-abiding.
So just a few are not.
Do not come
is
to
there
the-
specific criteria to this, though, is what I'm asking.
Well, the criteria will be sorted out under the regulations as we go through the process. And what I like about this is that we're actually going to go through the legislative process. We'll have select committee hearings. We'll hear from police about how they will enforce it, about the orders themselves and what it is that they need to be able to make sure it's effective. So the ability for orders to be lifted or to be changed will come under regulations. It will allow the police and the courts to determine what is the best things that they need to look
And
for.
just to clarify, but I would imagine this is the case, but just so I'm clear, a person does not have to be a gang member to then be held accountable for these lower thresholds. It can be anyone. So you don't have to be a person named on the national gang list
Correct.
to get an FPO under the expanded
Correct.
regime. Right?
But the police, when they go to the court, need to show that they have serious concerns about the person that uses or could be using firearms. They can't just put a low-level offender to the court and ask for a firearms prohibition order when they've actually had nothing to do with firearms.
What
Do you
what
know
would
how
you
many
s-
people of the 31 who have FPOs against them now are connected with gangs?
No, I don't know how many are connected with gangs.
And what about the
The
expanded
previous
number?
government changed the rules around, I think, giving police greater search powers. If there was crime happening and it was sort of in a gang conflict area, does that not go far enough, having given them those previous powers? I think gave them more powers around searching gang members for firearms. Did that not quite go far enough?
No, this is specific for those that have a firearms prohibition order placed upon them. The powers in previous announcements that we made last week was overall powers for search. This is about the firearms prohibition orders regime, which may not necessarily be on gang
And
members.
would you expect police to be also sort of targeting not just gang members but people with kind of extremist views who might have access to firearms? Yeah.
So you're now getting into the operational side of what police will be doing, and I'm not going to comment on that. That is something for the Minister of Police to speak to. What I would like to comment on is the actual firearms prohibition orders regime itself, but how they go about working this or the operational matter to that is not something that I'm
Do
privy
you
to.
think if you change if you bring back semi-automatic firearms, that you'd be making the police less safe?
And I think there needs to be a good clarification there. I'm not bringing back anything. The regime that we were looking at, or what was being discussed in the media, was about having an exemption for sporting purposes of semi-automatic firearms. We already have 6,600 approved licences for those semi-automatic firearms in this country. They have not been banned. I am not bringing them back.
Just on the 80 to 100, how many of those people do you expect to be people with gang connections?
I expect that all gang members that illegally hold, use and possess firearms will be captured by this legislation, and I hope that we are giving police enough tools to be able to go after them and make sure that they take those firearms
So all
away.
100?
I can't predict what it is going to be, Jason.
The search powers, are they, will police still have to apply for a warrant to execute the powers?
No, so a person with a firearms prohibition order placed upon them will have the ability by New Zealand Police to be searched at any time, at any place.
So if they're sitting in their gang pad, they've got an FPO, can the police go into that gang pad and search the whole place?
Correct. They can go in there and they can search the person and they can search the place. They can search the premise, the vehicle, the place of the person that has the FPO upon
And you're
them.
confident there'll be no Bill of Rights implications there?
As I mentioned, the initial Crown Law advice that I was given was telling me that there was no new penalty, nor was there no new punishment. Therefore, it's not a Bill of Rights issue.
So if in the execution of a search like that, other material was found, drugs, anything else that could lead to a criminal charge, will police be entitled to therefore pursue that criminal charge?
Well, again, that's going to be an operational matter for
But
police.
broadly, you expect that during a warrantless search that, you know, it's fair game.
What I am keen on is making sure that those gang members that commit the crime and the harm in our communities have taken away from them weapons such as these that police have brought in. These weapons have been seized by the police from people who should not have them, and we look at the harm that they're doing in our community, but we also look at some of the manufacturing that's occurring with 3D printing. We need to get these off the streets. We need to make sure that the gangs know that police now have the tools to be able to go after them and take these from them. That's the most important thing to keep our community safe.
It is a fair question, though. If the police are executing these warrantless searches and they see a pile of meth or something like that, just to put it crudely, will they have the ability to seize that and make arrests based on that?
Well, I don't see why not, but it's an operational matter. I mean, if you go into
That's what I
police
was
go
looking
into
for,
a place and they see meth, I don't think they're going to leave it behind.
No.
But
When you put it like that.
it creates a regime, right, where anyone who has an FPO on it is basically liable for search at any point. You know?
Correct.
Yeah, so I mean, it's quite pervasive powers, state powers, is it not?
I think that it's worthy to ensure that we continue to get firearms such as these off the streets, out of the hands of those who should not be having them, and away from those that are committing the crime in our communities.
Police are always keen to have more tools to do this kind of stuff, but at the same time, they don't want the expansion of access to semi-automatics to sport shooters. You know, what do you think of that? What conversations have you had with police about that?
So, as I mentioned in previous media, we are rewriting the entire Arms Act. That means everything is on the table, the good, the bad, the ugly. The moment we start excluding anything, it means that we're not having a full and proper conversation. Those conversations will happen with police and with the community and with the Justice Select Committee when we start to move through the Arms Act process.
Why not exclude the bad and the ugly?
Sorry?
Why not exclude the bad and the ugly?
Because we need to have a conversation to be able to have enduring legislation. In 2019 and 2020, we had rushed legislation that has caused more gun crime in this country than we've seen before. Between May 2022 and the 17th of May 2023, gang members alone committed 2.8 firearm offences every single day. Now that needs to stop. And we need police to make sure that they can keep taking firearms like this away from the criminals and keep our community safe.
Solely tied it to the legislation though, because like there was that was during the time where there was a big gang stoush in Auckland. So,
It's over a
so,
year.
Yeah, but so you can't,
It's over
tie
a
that
year.
to the legislative changes.
No, I'm looking at the data, and the data is telling us that over that year we had 2.8 firearm offences caused by gang members alone.
Why did the legislation in 2019 cause an increase in gun crime?
The legislation in 2019 and the legislation in 2020 did not help the regime that we currently have. And the reason why is because it was rushed. This is why the good, the bad, the ugly all needs to be discussed. Because what's good and what's bad and what's ugly to some is not to others. To some people, there is legitimate use of firearms for hunting, for sporting purposes, and those people were not heard back in 2019 and
Could you
2020.
specifically give an example of how that legislation led to this increase in gun crime that you talked about? Specifically that legislation, not something like anecdotally.
As an example, during what the police called the buyback, some called the confiscation process in 2020, there was an inability for gang members or unlicensed people to be able to hand in firearms. Now that became an issue. What it meant was that those that wanted to hand in firearms felt that they couldn't because they would be prosecuted. That made some of the firearms that were sitting in a grey market move down into the black market. We effectively want to take firearms out of the black market, make them legitimate, move them into the white market if we can, but most importantly, reduce the number of illegally held firearms that are out there in our community causing harm. There was an amnesty, but there were issues with people being able to hand in firearms. Those that were gang members, for example, only one gang member came in and handed in a firearm.
Do you mean there was a lack of trust?
Very much a lack of trust.
There was an amnesty, so how can you have an issue with an amnesty?
Because we still have issues now where people are handing in firearms, trying to hand in firearms, and then they are being, I guess they're being questioned, so they're not wanting to go in to do it. Now, if we don't make it an ability for people to hand in firearms, if we don't make an ability for those to be able to actually partake in legalising some of these firearms, then we're going to have an issue of making sure the black market grows. And we have seen a massive increase in the black market, including those that were frustrated at the time during the legislative changes, who did not know what to do with their firearms, and so they became off ticket.
Could we perhaps hear, I mean, have you got some further stuff on this? Otherwise, could
Oh,
hear
I
from
just
the operations
wanted to
side?
ask really quickly. I mean, no regime's perfect, right? But the fact that some people may not have handed in guns at the time, I mean, I don't know that you've effectively stacked up that the legislation that was passed in 2019 and 2020 has caused caused worse gun crime. You know, I don't. How can you justify that direct causation?
When you have a lack of confidence and trust in a regime, no matter what the regime is, whether it's arms, whether it's land transport, when you have a lack of confidence in a regime, then you're going to have people that go outside of that regime. The reality is that we have a massive increase in drugs, in firearm paraphernalia that have come into the country, that is in the country, that is being used illegally. We also want to make sure that those that are legitimate and legal are treated as being fit and proper people. At the moment, 250,000 people around the country are being treated like they are criminals because we don't know who has the illegal firearms against those that are wanting to legitimately use. The whole idea of this regime is to ensure that those with firearm prohibition orders are able to be corrected by police, checked by police, and cited by police to ensure that they don't have those firearms. When the introduction of the regime occurred in November 2022, we didn't go far enough to give police the tools to be able to search those people with FPOs. So we want to make sure that they can go in at any time, can check on those people with those FPOs to make sure that they're not still in possession of firearms.
Could we perhaps hear from police on this?
Minister, is it a good look for this government, for the Prime Minister, to be claiming tens of thousands of dollars in an accommodation supplement on his Wellington house or his Wellington apartment?
I'm not here to talk about the Prime Minister.
Oh, well, you're a minister in his cabinet. Do you not think it's a bit hypocritical that the Prime Minister is claiming a lot of money in an accommodation supplement on an apartment he owns, given the government is asking the whole public sector to tighten their belts?
I think that is a matter for the Prime Minister to answer. It's not even an issue that I'm actually aware of. So,
Minister, would these reforms have stopped Tarrant from his March 15 tax? Would have been able to identify him?
with Tarrant, he would not have been on a firearm prohibition order, I would have expected at that time, because he hadn't come to the attention of police. What the failure of Brenton Tarrant getting a firearms licence came down to was the licensing regime and the processing of the licence. That is something that will also be addressed during an Arms Act review.
Could we perhaps hear from police on the operational side? Is that okay?
We're only here to talk to the firearms today. If we have any further questions, we can finish.
Oh, so was there not the conversation about the operational side?
No, so we've got police here that are willing to talk about the firearms that are here today, and perhaps how they went about seizing them. But the actual operational side is not.
The mics, so...
They're just here to talk to the firearms on display, specifically the firearms. But the media centre, you can send any queries through the media centre, and we can pick them up.
So what's a variety of weaponry here found, and what situation were they found in?
So you've got a range of weaponry we've put up there as examples of what typically has been found amongst the criminal fraternity. Situations will have been criminal offending, search warrants, that nature of things. Those are examples of the type of things that we're seizing.
And how would this new reforms help your job?
Look, I can't talk to the operational side of the reforms, so I can only talk to what you've got on the table here at the moment.
You can talk to the operational side of the reforms, because there's quite a few logistical issues that we'd like to get our head around.
And that can go to the Minister of Police at this stage. But what I would like to point out to you is some of the firearms that have been seized here, including 3D printed firearms that the gentlemen have brought in today. This is really concerning. And when we do have people that are hell-bent on being able to produce and manufacture some of the types of firearms that we're seeing here today, it becomes a real issue for our community safety. And this is why we need to make sure that we do have the tools for police to be able to enforce the firearm prohibition orders on those that have those orders placed upon them.
Any
Right.
final questions?
Oh, Minister, do you claim an accommodation supplement on your place in Wellington?
No,
You don't?
no,
Nothing?
no.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Minister, can we get